Okay, good evening. Now, the next time you go to a steakhouse, you want to think about some other things. You need to order some steak tips. And steak tips are usually taken from the loin area of the animal here. And the best steak tips come at the top there, the sirloin steak tips. And they usually cut a strip like this. And then they just cut off the tips one at a time, and they end up something like this. And you can get them mixed in, and you can get them on a shish kebab or all sorts of things like that. What you want to remember with your steak tips is acro, which means tip. And when the server brings your steak tips to you, you ask them if they know, or you explain to them how mosses also have steak tips. And I'm trying to get there's the next slide. So here's this tip word acro, acrocarpus. So we're going to talk about two fundamental things. Hopefully that will help the novice bryologist. The definition is with reproductive structures, that could be archegonium, antheridium, those are the female and male structures, or the capsule, born at the tips of the stem or the tips of branches. So here's a stem, here's a cluster of antheridia. These are the sperm producing structures, and they're at the tip. Here's the branch here. And here's the capsule developing here at the tip of each one of these structures. So we call that plant an acrocarpus moss. And the definition has always to do with where are the reproductive structures. Here's some examples. Again, the stem here, the reproductive structure, the capsule right at the tip of the stem. Here's the long stem. Here's a developing stalk or seta, and here's the developing capsule at the tip of the stem. Here's a whole bunch of stems jammed in together, and at the tip of all of these stems, you find the reproductive structure. So that's pretty straightforward, and I think we can understand that. What if there are no reproductive structures? Well, acrocarpus mosses tend to have a certain growth form. This growth form is not what defines an acrocarpus moss, but it holds together pretty well. They are in tight clumps or cushions. The stems all tend to be sort of parallel, jammed in together, erect. Here you can see all these stems from previous years all jammed very tightly together to form this clump. Sometimes they're loose, however, a little bit more like this, but you sort of get the general idea that it's a cushion or a tight tuft. That would be the incline that leads you to think this is probably an acrocarpus moss. Okay, the next time you go to a steakhouse, order ribs. Ribs, come off the spine of the animal. In this case, you're getting pork ribs. And so here is the main spine of the animal, and the ribs come off lateral or on the side. And the word for that is pleuro. And so when she brings your ribs, that I hope they look like that, you explain to her that mosses have ribs also. And these would be pleurocarpus mosses or ribbed mosses, where the reproductive structures are born laterally or at the sides of the stems, either the main stem or the sides of branches. So here's a very good example. Here's a stem. There's no reproductive structure there. Here's a stem. The reproductive structure comes right off the side there, not at the tip of a branch, but in the axil there of a leaf. Here's a stem. There are no reproductive structures there. Here's a stem, and here is the capsule coming off laterally the side or the rib of this stem. Here's a whole bunch of stems. You can see a lot of these tips like that, but you see capsules here, and if you follow that seta down, you'll find it coming off the side of a stem down there. Or you might find them coming off the side right there, but it would not be at the tip. So this would be pleurocarpus. What if you don't have? Well, here's some more examples. Here we have some tightly branched stems, and the seed of the capsule disappears down into this mass of stems. Just the mass of stems. Here you see the same thing. It almost looks like an acrocarpus moss because the stems are all kind of erect, jammed in close together, but that seta goes right down. So you have to dig in there and look for where that attachment is. Here you have a bunch of stems, and here you have a bunch of, a bunch of seta and capsules and a bunch of stems. So your first guess is, boy, those are going to be attached somewhere down laterally, none of them at the tip. And we see the same thing there. Well, if we don't have reproductive structures in a pleurocarpus moss, they generally are freely branched. They form mats spread out, prostate stems. And here you have all these branches coming off. Here, all you see are branches. Here are individual branches coming off, lots and lots of branches. Nothing is very packed in tight in a horizontal fashion like a cushion, but they are rather dense mats, but the stems are all willy-nilly in a spread out along the ground there. Okay, that's acrocarpus and pleurocarpus. Find where the reproductive structure is attached. However, here you've got a highly branched moss, lots of branches creeping across the rock. It looks very pleurocarpus. You can see even here, but very definite here at the ends of all these branches are the reproductive structures. So this would technically be an acrocarpus moss, and I believe that's how it's treated by most workers. However, if one were to write an identification manual to mosses and include this species of Hedwigia, one would be clever to put it in both sides of the key, both acrocarpus and pleurocarpus, because people confuse that. That's my brief disquisition on acrocarpus and pleurocarpus. Any questions?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
So is acrocarpus and pleurocarpus simply an observation or a thing as opposed to something fundamentally about the species and the genetics of the plant?
Those are terms, descriptive terms relating to the morphology of where the reproductive structures arise. They're genetically controlled and they group together pretty much within genera and species, etc. I'm not sure I'm following your question. Am I answering your question?
Yes, you did. Yeah, the answer is that it is related to the genes and the structure. And the reason I said if you put it in both keys, then what would happen is the key where you kept the one on the left here, where because you don't see reproductive, it does look very, pleurocarpusy or what well. Then what you could do is branch back to the acrocarp, right?
Yeah, if you put it on both sides of, for instance, in our little book, we have it keying out if you choose acrocarp, and it keys out if you choose pleurocarp.
Oh,
So
good for
you
you.
get to it either way. The key is not meant to reflect any kind of genetic or phyletic or phylogenetic relationship. The key is just meant to help you identify it. So
Excellent.
we put it in both groups. At least that's what we did.
Kelly, do you
Yes.
remember some more species where you put them in both pleurocarp and acrocarp parts of your key in your big green book?
Well, my memory's not that good, and I'm not sure that we have. There are lots of instances in the Big Green Book where I put things on both sides of a key lead because it's difficult to interpret. In this Hedwigia that we're looking at, it just looks, once you see the capsules, it's an easy interpretation. But sometimes things are difficult to interpret, and so I stick them on both sides of a lead to help, someone going through there. And my memory's not good enough to remember about acrocarpus and pleurocarpus. That's why I wrote it all down. So we'll have to look in the book.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Kelly,
you.
very much.